Hello and welcome to another episode of Autogefühl. Today with me AJ and Jonas. With the advent of the SUV craze in the market, it was only time before hot SUVs became the new breed of hot hatches. Enter the Skoda Kodiaq RS, or vRS, depending on which market you're in. The first Skoda SUV ever to wear the RS badge. It's still based on the same reliable, practical, and fairly attainable Skoda Kodiaq, but this time it has the most powerful diesel engine ever fitted to a Skoda and has the lap record at the Nürburgring for the fastest 7-seat SUV. That's right, got me pretty interested as well. That's why I'm here on a rainy day, just a couple hours outside of Cologne, to see what it's all about. Are you ready? Let's find out. Come on, let's go. The Kodiaq RS is pretty much the top end of the trim lines, so it comes with a lot of kit as standard. Up front, it is about 2 meters wide, and it, of course, looks a lot more aggressive. This is a very sporty, racy-looking blue color, Thomas blue, which I think goes really well with this car. The full LED headlights are also standard with the RS. Nothing much different, except for, of course, these glossy black front grille, which again evokes that sporty character of the RS. The RS or vRS, depending on how you look at it, badge in the front. Although if you look a little bit closer, you see that there's only a red line and there's no green line anymore. Further down, a little bit more of an aggressive, sporty design. The cruise control, adaptive cruise control radar also in the middle. Overall, a pretty cool, good-looking design. The small touches for the RS make it a little bit better. The Kodiaq RS is 4.7 meters long, standard length as the standard car, but in the RS it comes as standard with 20-inch wheels and upgraded brakes as well. Some of the other standard equipment for the RS, of course, are things like the dynamic chassis control, which is the electronically adjusting damping system, and we'll talk more about that once we're driving. Squared off wheel arches with black cladding. So it is definitely an SUV body style and shape. Still maintains a fairly high ground clearance, so it is fairly capable of tackling rough roads. Also comes as standard with the all-wheel drive system, the Haldex electronic clutch, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But as the RS line, a few other distinguishing features as I cross this puddle. I can tell you it's, for example, the glossy black cap on the outside rear view mirror. Also, the trim along the edges of the window frame is also glossy black. As we go further down, the roof rails also, you will notice, are black, and we come towards the end where at this angle it looks a little bit longer and sleeker, but it is pretty much the same as the standard Kodiaq. At the back of the car, there is no real spoiler of sorts, which I think I don't really miss because of course it's only cosmetic, but generally we see in these kinds of sporty trim lines there will be like a larger glossy black spoiler, but we don't see that. Only a little bit of elements flanking the sides. Very large rear window. As we go further down, a very clean design for the rear hatch. vRS badging down here, 4x4 badging on the other side. A large horizontal strip along the bottom of the hatch, which is a reflector, which I think adds a nice touch and some detailing to break up the monotony or the monotone color of the rear of the car. Further down towards the bumper, this is where I know this is going to split a few opinions. There is a little bit of a diffuser-like design to, again, give a little bit more of a sporty character. But let's talk about the exhausts, because we love talking about the exhausts. There are two tips. The one on this side, closer to me, is completely fake and cosmetic. There is nothing behind it, although I do see punch-outs, which kind of, give me a hint that perhaps, first of all, because of the shape, they're not interchangeable parts, which means it's a unique part that they have. Perhaps we can expect a petrol for the RS in the future, and that would really have two exhaust tips, and that's why they've kind of designed this to go with that. But on the other side, this is where there is a cosmetic tip in the front, and the actual exhaust is just tucked away behind that. So, I don't know, make of it what you will. Let me know, put it down in the comments below. All right, now this is the part where things get really interesting. Let's see what's under the hood. Also a test to show that you can lift the trunk, the hood with just one hand, thanks to these gas charged struts. So, what do we have here? What makes the RS special? Like I mentioned, this is the first SUV Skoda RS ever, and this is the most powerful diesel engine ever put into Skoda. It's the 2-liter TDI, which is a bi-turbo 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine. This makes 240 horsepower and 500 Newton meters of torque. It comes coupled with the 7-speed DSG, which is a dual-clutch transmission. As you can see, it is transversely mounted, that's the word, but it is front-wheel drive oriented and biased, but it has the Haldex all-wheel drive system. They call it the Intelligent 4x4. So what essentially it is a on-demand all-wheel drive system. The transaxle has a propeller shaft which goes all the way under the car through the central transmission tunnel to a clutch pack, a multi-plate clutch pack at the rear axle. This clutch pack disengages and engages to, couple the rear axle and the rear wheels to the drive, and in this way, on demand, becoming all-wheel drive when required. It also has an electronic differential, which is what they call it, but in real engineering terms, it's basically a brake-based torque manipulation system. It's not even torque vectoring. It's not proactive, it's more reactive. So it's not braking the inside wheel when you go into a corner, but it monitors things like the wheel speed around a corner, and if you're really leaning over to one side, because it's an SUV, probably will happen, then it starts braking the inside wheel to send more power to the outside. So overall, that is a pretty useful system. So it has all-wheel drive, it has the dual-clutch transmission with paddle shifters, fairly powerful engine, although it's diesel. How does that fare? We'll find out once we're driving. It does also have, for the first time, a sound booster, which I will show you and talk about once I'm inside. Apart from that, it has upgraded brakes, as I mentioned. It comes as standard with dynamic chassis control, which is the adaptive suspension damping. So again, to kind of maintain a stiff suspension setup to improve the chassis and the handling capabilities. And also as standard, it comes with a progressive steering rack. What's the progressive steering rack? Well, it's not a linear reactive rack. So what it means is it is fairly a medium speed rack at dead center, and as you start putting lock on either side, the ratio of one rotation of the steering wheel is not the same as the angle on the actual displacement of the wheel. It turns more, it dives into the corner even faster the more you turn the wheel. So that also helps make the car feel more agile. So let's put that to the test once we get on the road, but first let's take a look inside. All right, let's take a look inside. First of all, here's the key. We have keyless entry, and there's also a auxiliary heater and ventilator. This is the race blue metallic color, which I mentioned earlier. I think is a nice color for this car. Fairly large door, opens really wide. I think this is a very adequate proportional size for an SUV, and the door is also part of that. As with all Skodas, Jonas, if you look at the door edge, you have these simply clever features, and there's so many of them. I really enjoy these details. And for example, this kind of a guard for the edge of your door to make sure you don't dent the cars next to you in a car park. There's also a umbrella, which is very useful for a day like this, right here in the door. So I really like these touches. We'll look at some more once we're inside. Even things like the ice scraper on the fuel filler cap. Materials inside the door panel are pretty good. So this is fairly soft touch. There is like a carbon fiber effect plastic running at the top. Alcantara material over here, which is nice and soft. Soft leatherette. Only over here it gets a little bit hard. Another simply clever feature is this trash can that just fits into your door pocket, which is also, by the way, has plenty of space. If we take a brief look inside, well, there's a lot of black, of course, inside, but you also get these bespoke RS sports seats, which we'll talk more about once we're inside. So, Jonas, why don't you hop on in? I'm getting really wet. Now we're dry and warm inside the car. Let's take a look at the seats. We have sport seats here at the RS with integrated headrest, nice red detailing in the stitching around the edges of the seat, and this quilted material, this quilted pattern as well. Alcantara and leatherette is the combination, which I think is a great combination, sustainable and a lot more affordable than actual leather. Interesting to note also is this kind of pattern along the edge of the seat. So this kind of is similar to a carbon fiber stitching pattern, but of course this is just a design. What do you think about that? The steering wheel for the RS is also very sporty with red contrast stitching, a nice grip and perforated material, and a flat bottom. A lot of controls to navigate through the digital dashboard, the virtual cockpit, and stalks for the adaptive cruise control on the left-hand side. Up here, the materials are also fairly soft. There is this carbon fiber type inlay across the front of the dashboard, similar to what we saw on the door. I think is very in line with the sporty character of the car. So let's talk a little bit about some of the technology, and let's start with the virtual cockpit, this digital dashboard. So it's one large screen with multiple ways of viewing your information. As you can see, there's even a specific sport dial with a large tachometer in the middle. Although it's pretty funny to see that it redlines at 5,000 RPM, so dead giveaway that you're driving a diesel. And there's a lot of different things you can have in the middle of the display. So you can have, for example, the driving data, but also you can have the map. And because this is the more advanced system, unlike the T-Cross or the T-Rock, you can have the map here on this screen simultaneously with that on the main infotainment touchscreen. There's a one-key button for your assistance systems. This car comes with lane assist, blind spot monitoring, traffic alert, and front assist. So a good combination of very useful and very nice advanced driving assistance systems. Let's divert our attention to the actual touchscreen itself. First of all, this is, it depends on which one you specify. This system does not have any kind of knobs for volume or zooming in and out, which I would have preferred. And it also leaves a little bit of, fingerprints the longer you use it. There's a home button where you can have a combination of, for example, your audio, your telephone, and navigation, which I really like. I think it's a good way to have just this screen running at all times. But of course, you can set different things. You have SmartLink with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and different options to set for the car interior, the air conditioning, the sound, so on and so forth. Down here, we have the dual zone climate control with seat heaters as well. Also very nice for a cold, wet day as today. Some more buttons over here. An inductive phone charging port, which can be covered up. It's not it's a manually sliding back and forth kind of a cover. 12-volt power socket, a couple USB ports. This is the 7-speed DSG, the lever for that, of course. Off-road mode, we'll test that out once we're out driving. Traction control button, electronic parking brake, auto hold, and the driving mode button, which I'll talk more about. Jonas, if you look back up here really quick. So a very flush design for the two glove boxes. That's right, there's one down here and there's one up there. So simply clever, Skoda does it again. And I think this is a nice place to keep maybe a tablet or some other items, and of course a very conventional glove box with, you see, a small pen holder and a pen as well, which is simply clever. The CD player and SD card slots and a SIM card slot for the LTE connection for your system. Let's take a look at the center console or the center armrest. Nice cubby hole. Another simply clever feature is this kind of a detachable insert that you can have, which has, for example, places to keep some cards and coins. And also these indentations you see fit right in with most bottles, and you can actually open these bottles with just one hand. This is not the right shape, but most bottles have that kind of a indentation that will fit into these grooves, and then you can just open the cap with just one hand while you're driving. Also, you can move it. Let's give it the shake test. Not too bad, I would say. So build quality is what we expect from Skoda. The interior of the Kodiaq RS is fairly black in terms of the color scheme, as you can see. And while there is a lot of space, you know, I'm 5'8", there's plenty of headroom and the windows are also really large. One thing that definitely helps make the cabin feel brighter and bigger is this large panoramic sunroof. It is an option, but I would definitely recommend it. And I think it really brightens up the cabin, and you can even open it, and it opens pretty much at least about 45% of the way. So also a nice way to kind of get that open air feeling. All right, let's take a seat in the back. Excuse my incredibly muddy shoes. It's inevitable. So inside, wow, a lot of space. So it is a very practical. Again, the body shape I think is a really great match between form and function. Very handsome design, but at the same time, lots of space inside. There's a lot of headroom. Of course, with this panoramic roof, you do lose a little bit of space on the side, but you get a little bit more space in the middle, and of course, the roof, the glass itself. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but even Thomas fits quite fine. You can watch our coverage at the launch of the RS, and you can see how he sits, how he fits. Plenty of knee room and plenty of space for me to slide my feet under the front seat. This is set to my driving position, roughly. I'm 5'8" or 1.7 meters. Even with the seat in a lower position, you know, it feels there's plenty of space. More simply clever features like this sunshade on the side, interior lighting, which you can change the color of, by the way. Soft materials on the door handle where you put your elbow. Alcantara material over here. So quality of materials are still maintained pretty high and pretty well. Air conditioning vents with a third climate zone and seat heaters for the outside two seats. So your rear passengers are also very well catered to, along with a USB charging port, a 12-volt power socket, and a 230-volt plug socket. So all your iPads, laptops, phones, everything that your kids have can be charged on the go. Door pockets as well. And let's take a look in the center, in this middle seat. So the bench is, of course, slightly higher, SUV upright seating position. So in a way, it's not that bad, because even though there's a little bit more gap with my thigh, I still have, you know, a little bit of under-thigh support and place for me to slide my feet. The transmission tunnel, while it does impede a little bit of space, there is still these little kind of niches on the side where I can tuck my feet in. So a third passenger, I would say, would fit in pretty well inside. You don't have a third passenger, you can also use this as a armrest with 3 cup holders. There are isofix points for the outside 2 seats, which don't have that kind of flip up cover, just a pop in, pop out cover. But at least, you know, these isofix points are located right on the outside, as you can see, so it's very easy to identify. In the German market, you can get the Kodiaq RS as a 5-seater like the one we have, but also as a 7-seater. In some markets like the UK, I think it's only available as a 7-seater for the time being. And if it were a 7-seater, one really useful feature is this. You can actually slide the middle bench forwards. I need 2 hands. forward like this. So, a sacrifice between whoever's sitting in the middle and the third row of passengers, is a good way to kind of have that flexibility. Let's take a look inside the trunk. There's an automatic tailgate. And wow, colossal area. This is what 600 liters looks like. You can push this parcel shelf out of the way and remove it altogether. If you had the 7-seat option as well, those seats would pretty much lie as flat as this floor is right now. So you do still have a lot of space, even if you did have that 7 seats and you don't need it. A lot of more simply clever features, like some cubby holes on the side. There's kind of a railing with these hooks to hang things. There's a automatic tailgate release to tow for the tow bar. There is also a 12-volt power socket. Jonas, if you look on this side, there's also a LED light that you can use when you're loading items, but also you can just take this out and it becomes a flashlight that you can use in the night when you're just loading things in. So simply clever is the name of the game. More cubby holes over there. More simply clever features such as this pouch with this blanket in the back. You can also move the floors down. I don't want to remove this, it's very muddy, so just bear with me. You can imagine, like for example, you can liberate more volume. You can also do that for this front section of the floor, and that way there's plenty more room. And of course, you can fold the seats in a 60-40 fashion, and then you have even more loading area. All right, let's start the drive of the Kodiaq RS or vRS. First things first, I'm going to put it into sport mode. Now, a number of things have changed. First of all, the sound. There is a dynamic audio booster, the sound booster, which is coupled with the exhaust, and it kind of amplifies the exhaust note a little bit and makes the car a lot more vocal. And the sound of the exhaust is amplified within the cabin. Now, is that something you like or don't like? Well, you have to judge for yourself, but it certainly evokes a lot more sporty characteristics for the car. Second thing is the throttle response. Now, the throttle response, the mapping is heightened, it's sharpened, it gives you really quick responses to any inputs. Thanks to this engine being a bi-turbo, it gives you very immediate responses. I've been driving already for a little bit and I did not feel any turbo lag whatsoever. The next thing that changes in sport mode is the steering weight. The steering actually is very nice. I'm quite happy with this. First of all, as standard, the steering comes, you get the progressive steering, which means it's not a linear rack. As you steer further, like right now, the angle of change, the displacement increases. So as you steer further and further from lock to lock, the actual reaction of the wheels increases as well. So it's a progressive steering rack and it gives you much more sharper responses. The weight also aids in providing it a little bit more feedback from the road, and it's actually a really nice steering system. The all-wheel drive is also now trying to be more sporty. It helps control a little bit of the yaw, and in that way also provides more agile cornering and handling capabilities. I really like that road. Let's turn around and go back up and try that again going up. Of course, I will...
You can go straight.
I can go straight? Okay, well, Jonas actually grew up around here, didn't you, Jonas? We're a little bit outside of Cologne. The weather's not that nice, but Jonas knows all the great places where he used to skateboard. Right here?
Yeah, you can turn around.
I can turn around. Great, okay. Now I need to back up. This is also a good opportunity to show you the top-down 360-degree camera. So there's cameras on the wing mirrors, the front and the back, which all together provide a nice top-down view, so you can see if you're coming close to the sidewalk or the curb, and also a rear-view camera with dynamic guidelines. Also helps in rainy weather like this, as long as the camera is not full of water, or covered with water rather. Another thing that changes now with the sport mode is the 7-speed DSG. It doesn't do things like coasting, doesn't try to be economical. Instead, it shifts up much later, so it gives you all of that nice meaty power band right in the middle of the rev range to have all that fun. Of course, you can flick it right and then take control with the paddle shifters. I must say, it's actually pretty fun. Brakes really well as well because this car has the upgraded brakes, so it gives you a lot of confidence, like right now, to brake hard, brake late, turn into the corner. Really good visibility out the side. Shift down. I mean, yes, it does roll a little bit, but another thing that changes when you put it in sport mode is the dynamic chassis control, the DCC. And with this, what happens is the suspension damping becomes stiffer. So with that, it helps control the body roll of the SUV a little bit more. You know, the truth is that sound booster might not, give you a very authentic exhaust note, but just because you can hear the engine a little bit more, it's important when you're driving quickly and you're driving sporty and enthusiastically and spiritedly, just because hearing that engine also is part of that sensation of speed. It's really important to hear the engine revving and when you shift up and down, and it's another way where you can try to kind of practice your shifts, make sure you improve the time that you're shifting and things like that. So while it's a diesel, it's a 4-cylinder, and it's artificially amplified, I think it's pretty good too. In the sport mode, we see that actually the Kodiaq RS is actually quite engaging and dynamic to drive. Of course, it's a pretty large SUV, but at the same time, it's not, even though it has a Nürburgring track record, you're not going to take this on the track. It's for, somebody who likes to drive, but at the same time wants a car without a compromise, because you have plenty of space with 7 seats for your whole family. It's kind of a jack of all trades, but an athletic jack of all trades. So that way, I think in the sport mode, it's quite fine. It's fun enough. Of course, the diesel engine, the con is it doesn't really sound that nice and it doesn't rev as freely as a petrol, but there's a lot of torque, and in the end, it's not going to be as thirsty as a fast turbocharged petrol engine would be. And in terms of the dynamic chassis control, the steering, the 4-wheel drive, the 7-speed DSG, and you even have this cool little sport mode for the gauges on the virtual cockpit. So overall, it seems pretty nice. It has a nice sporting personality. You can also put a lot of other things like the map and navigation on this screen, so it is fairly usable. But let's check out some of the other stuff, the other driving modes. So we can go into eco mode, and now the audio booster is immediately turned off. The engine becomes really quiet. The 7-speed DSG also coasts, so right now it's decoupled the engine and the transmission, and it's just using its momentum and weight to go downhill. And it's a very seamless transition when I put my foot down, and even though I'm just barely ticking over at 60 kilometers per hour, it's already in 6th gear. So the transmission also shifts up much earlier and tries to be as frugal as possible. The air conditioning as well is also much more economical in terms of the profile, in terms of how much energy it uses to cool and heat the cabin. It might not be the quickest, but it's also very frugal that way. The steering is a little bit kind of in between. It's definitely much lighter than the sport mode, but also to save more fuel, it's a little bit heavier than in comfort mode because there is less energy being used to assist it. Then we have comfort mode, where the audio booster, the sound booster, is on a little bit. So there's 3 levels, right? So the first level is for the comfort mode, the second level is for the normal mode, and the loudest level is for the dynamic sport mode. In comfort mode, the steering is also really light. The dynamic chassis control is also in its softest setting, so the suspension is very supple. It's a lot more roly-poly, like here's a roundabout, let's do one quick lap around it. As you can see, the body does roll a little bit, And it's expected, but it's not that bad. At slow speeds, it doesn't wallow around as such. But this comfort profile is really nice when you're going on long drives on the highway. Unfortunately, in this weather, there's a lot of traffic on the highway, so we won't have a chance to go and test it out. But along with this comfort mode, you have adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist with intervention, blind spot monitoring. So these assistance systems all together in conjunction give you a very comfortable, relaxing motorway cruise, which is essential if you're going on a big family holiday with all your kids. You need that comfort, right? The last thing that should be causing you stress is the car. The normal mode then would be a little bit more balanced in terms of the sound, the steering weight, the throttle response, the dynamic chassis control, so on and so forth. And let's take a quick look at the mileage that we're getting. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a very realistic number, and bear with me, it's a bit of a shock. It's 16.1 liters per 100 kilometers, which is incredibly a big number. But the truth is, it's okay because it's not a realistic number. So I can expect much lower numbers, even numbers as low as 7 on the highway, because again, thanks to that diesel, and being a bi-turbo, there's always torque, so you don't really have to ever rev the engine too high on the highway, and there's always enough torque to overtake, so you're not really, running the engine at a high RPM. In that scenario either. But yes, it is really high right now. Maybe towards the end of the drive we can check in on that as well. Now let's talk about some of the other things inside the cabin. Of course, in the sport mode, if you do have this loud exhaust mode, it is quite loud and it does get a little bit of it's like a white noise. It's always there. It can give you a little bit of a disturbance. It can give you a little bit of a headache after a long time being exposed to that. But you can go to individual mode and you can set up the steering and set up everything else to be very sporty, but turn off the sound booster and keep the suspension also soft. It's not necessarily uncomfortable in the sport mode, the DCC, but it's definitely a lot more firm, and it's definitely also a lot more bumpy when you're going off rough surfaces. So if you still want to have a comfortable drive, it might make sense to keep the DCC in comfort when you have everything else in sport. The seats themselves also hold me in place fairly well. There is a decent amount of side bolstering. Again, it's a Kodiaq, it's not a track car. So it's more comfort oriented, I would say. And there's a lot of adjustments for the lumbar support, but it's also fairly wide. So again, it's usable in a lot of situations, not just in sporty situations. It is a little bit tight to maneuver in tight city spaces or to make 3-point turns in tight, narrow areas. I tried that a couple of times ago when I was putting this car out of the parking lot, and it was a little bit tight, but of course it's a large SUV or a mid-size SUV, so that's expected, completely acceptable. And even though it's fairly heavy, it does mask its weight pretty well. And this has a proper SUV stance, so it is very upright, it is very tall, large windows, the windshield is also very expansive. Optional panoramic sunroof also makes it a lot more bright on the inside, so you can actually see the top of the hood anyway. You can place the car very easily, and of course, thanks to that top-down parking assist 360-degree camera, it's very easy when you're really trying to navigate in small, tight areas. Even though the wheels are also quite large, it doesn't feel that uncomfortable. Now let's go back to comfort mode. The suspension is supple, and the wheels are actually not that bad. They have low-profile performance tires, but it does feel very comfortable. So I am quite impressed. Yes, for the true enthusiast, I love sports cars and I love hot hatches, but this is the new breed because this is still what the current market considers to be reliable and practical, right? It's the compact SUV. This crossover segment is booming right now, and everybody says this is what they would prefer to buy. So it makes sense that even here, making a hot SUV is only logical, and I think the Kodiaq RS is a good package overall. So we found an off-road track, a little bit of a dirt track here, and we thought we'd try out the off-road capability of the Kodiaq RS, so we have a thorough review. There is a button here which says off-road, so when I click on that, I get this off-road view which shows me the steering angle, departure angle, and things like that. So now in the off-road mode, the gearbox holds first gear as long as it can. The all-wheel drive, the Haldex clutch unit, is engaged for as long as it can for extended periods of time to ensure there's always good traction going to all wheels and enough torque. The steering is also really lightweight, so that I can make quick corrections very easily. Wow, there's a very beautiful crane over there. And the start-stop, engine start-stop, is also deactivated. The traction control is also managing traction on loose gravel surfaces like this. That ground clearance is helping, cross these, these twigs in the middle in this trench. And I must say, it's pretty good. Of course, these tires are not meant to be off-road tires at all, but for going up a track like this in rainy weather or on sand or on loose surfaces, and of course in the snow, this is where an off-road all-wheel drive car like this definitely helps out. It might not be perfect, but it's also much better than not having anything at all. So I'm going to try to make a quick U-turn here so we can see how the traction is on wet surfaces when I am at a standstill in the mud. No problem. So these low profile tires are pretty good. This also has hill descent control. So now we're going down this muddy hill, and I can see a little symbol on the infotainment system which says that the hill descent control is activated. So I can let go of the throttle and the brake and let the software manage engine braking by individually braking the wheels. It will also maintain traction using the all-wheel drive system and maintain a steady, controlled descent downhill. So, it's pretty impressive because, of course, this is not a real challenge for any car. You could still do this in a front-wheel drive car in most scenarios, but in the snow and again on wet surfaces where there's not necessarily, off-road, it's more of less traction. This kind of an all-wheel drive system helps out. And it also has, like I said, it can individually brake wheels to maintain traction, but that's also applicable when you're going on-road, not just off-road. So it's kind of like torque vectoring, but it doesn't necessarily do torque vectoring, but it's a little bit more reactive than a proactive torque vectoring brake-based system. Skoda actually calls it a electronic differential, and I'm not so sure that's the correct technical engineering term for that, because it is not necessarily an E-differential or a locking differential. It's a differential where you can brake individual wheels and in that way prevent certain wheels from locking and slipping. But nevertheless, if I'm in sport mode and I'm going around a tight corner with that all-wheel drive system and this braking effect, it does maintain a very controlled response. Of course, this does not mean that this car has any kind of oversteering capability or handling characteristic. Nope, it's a very planted and very grippy, and if anything, it'll tend to understeer. These brakes, I also felt they're great for dry conditions, I'm sure, but in the wet with these tires, on off-road slippery surfaces, the wheels tend to lock up a lot more easily. And that's something you should just be aware of. Not necessarily a deal breaker, but that's also kind of the flip side of having a very strong brake. It's not as progressive as I wish it would have been, because I did find that it was locking and the ABS was kicking in times where I felt that it shouldn't be doing. But these are really minor niggles, and I think an overall very well-rounded package, an athletic jack of all trades, as I mentioned, on a family car, which can go pretty fast. So I'm fairly happy. But there's one thing that I'm not happy about, and I'll tell you in a minute. Okay, so we did finally get up onto the highway, and now let's test out the highway mannerisms of the new Kodiaq RS. So first of all, I'm going to put it in eco mode so that we can at least try to salvage somehow realistic number of the fuel economy on a little bit more of a combined driving cycle. I'm going to use the hotkey button to turn on lane assist, blind spot monitoring, and all the other assistance systems. There's a button here which I can use, there's a stalk rather, which I can use to activate the, let's see, there we go. To activate the adaptive cruise control, I can set the speed to, like I've done now, to 120 kilometers per hour. The car maintains a safe distance that I've set with the car in front and will keep me in lane when I'm not changing lanes also. So it is level 2 semi-autonomous. At this speed, again in eco mode, the car feels fairly comfortable. The surface is a bit rough on this highway right now, so it does feel a little bit bumpy, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily uncomfortable. It is raining as well, so the tire noise and the road noise is also a little bit amplified, and of course the rain hitting the windscreen makes it a little bit louder. But overall, it is a very hushed cabin. There's a nice light from the panoramic sunroof as well, which is always nice when you're going on long drives to kind of open up the inside of the cabin, especially since there's so much of black inside. With this, that lets in more light and makes it feel a little bit more spacious. So in that way, the assistance systems really help out, gives you that confidence, that all-wheel drive system, and this nice heavier steering wheel now at higher speeds gives you a little bit more confidence as well. I can set that distance a little bit higher, so there's a car pulling out in front of me, a truck, so the car will now automatically brake as it is right now to maintain that distance. This eco mode also means that the way the car brakes and accelerates again, like as you can see this guy's pulling away now, is also more gradual and it's not abrupt. So in this way as well, the Kodiaq RS maintains more efficiency in the eco mode. The seats are also fairly comfortable, so at highway speeds, even though maybe the suspension is a little bit on the firmer side, or because of that extra body height, it might buff it a little bit more. The seat also helps absorb a lot of that and maintain a very comfortable driving experience. So right now it's still saying I'm doing about 12.4 liters for 100 kilometers, which is still a bit too high. Unfortunately, this is not going to get much better in today's episode. Perhaps at a later point we can do a more thorough long-term test of the car and give you more realistic figures. It's still already going down. It's 12.3 since the last time I said it just a couple seconds ago. So I can expect numbers as low as 8, very easily doable, manageable with this engine. But yeah, also coasting right now, and it's got a lot of these little features to help make it more economical, and in normal mode a little bit more balanced as well. So yes, on the highway the Kodiaq is a nice long distance cruiser. Let's summarize today's drive of the Kodiaq RS. By the way, after I finished that highway segment, I did reset the trip meter, and even though I drove for only about 10 kilometers after that, I saw numbers around 6 liters for 100 kilometers, which might not be realistic in a combined cycle, but is a great indication of the mileage that you can expect from this engine on the highway. So that brings me to the overall my overall takeaway from this car, and that is it's a no compromise car. It's got the practicality that we know from the Kodiaq, all the details to make your life a little bit easier from the Skoda Simply Clever philosophy, and it still looks very handsome with these touches, with that black glossy inlays on the sides, on the outside, and the grille, these large wheels. It looks a lot more athletic than the standard Kodiaq, so the RS distinguishes itself as well. And, before I wasn't really into the hot SUV philosophy, but I'm saying right now, why not? Because, again, you're not going to be taking this car on a track, even though it is the Nürburgring record holder for the fastest 7-seat SUV. I'm not going to try to break that record anytime. What matters to me is how fun it is to drive on twisty mountain roads, and we saw that it is. It has a capable chassis thanks to a lot of standard equipment like the progressive steering rack, upgraded brakes, the dynamic chassis control, and the all-wheel drive system. The diesel motor, I think, maybe there's a petrol that might come out later, or a hybrid perhaps somewhere in the future. But I see why they went with diesel, because it makes more sense as an overall package, because you still have good mileage. But I don't like the sound of it. I think that audio booster personally was something I didn't find nice. It did help kind of make you perceive speed a little bit better because it was louder on the inside, but it felt a little bit too artificial than some of the other sound actors that we see, and which I'm also quite okay with. On the whole, practicality, like I mentioned, is a plus. I would recommend you get the 7-seat version, because the truth is, I mean, if you're buying a practical family SUV, you have that option to sit more people. And even though we didn't get a chance to check it out, I do know that those 2 seats are pretty usable for people of roughly my size, and kids for sure will be very happy to sit back then. And then just think about it. Your whole family on a vacation, comfortable cruising on the highway with the assistance systems, and once you come off the highway and onto some twisty roads, you can make everybody laugh and everybody smile by having a little bit of fun. The only thing that I'm not happy about and I'm not smiling about is the price tag. It's, as near as makes no difference, 50,000 euros, which I think is quite steep, really. I mean, it is a Skoda, it is an SUV. I would have expected it to be a little bit better priced. The truth is, the Octavia vRS, or the Octavia RS, is a very common car. It's sold quite a lot. And I don't know if this is going to achieve that kind of a status. And I think to kind of penetrate this market, this niche of hot SUVs, pricing is really crucial. But we'll only see when, after a few months have passed, and if we can look into some of the sales numbers. But what do you guys think? Is it too expensive? Or do you think this overall great package, this overall jack of all trades, off-road, sporty SUV combination is worth 50 grand? Put it down in the comments below. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Jonas and I had a great time, and I'll see you guys next time.